Welcome to the High Note Podcast. I am Ted Zimnicki, founder of High Note Performance and HNPacademy.com, where we bring the tools perfected by sports science and neurology to high achievers in every field to turn them into the kind of athletes that companies want to hire again and again and again. Joining us today, we have an incredible Heldon tenor and choir director. He is the director of vocal activities at Augustana University in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, where he currently conducts the over 100-year-old Augustana Choir, while also somehow finding the time to continue his love of woodworking and becoming a self-proclaimed, deeply terrible golfer. It is the one and only Dr. Russell Svenningsen.
Hi, Ted. So nice to be here. Thank you.
It is an absolute pleasure to have you. And I, of course, gave you a brief introduction, but for anyone who may not have heard of you, Russell, who are you and what do you do?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Ted. Well, as you mentioned, I'm not from, we are in, Augustana is in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, but I am not a Midwestern boy. I was born and raised on the East Coast in New Jersey. Don't hold that against me. I grew up in a musical family, just outside the city. Went to Concordia College in northern Minnesota because that's, where when I was growing up, that's where the great choirs are, St. Olaf and Concordia and Luther, and the list goes on. I heard the Concordia Choir in Carnegie Hall when I was 16, and I told my mother that that's where I wanted to go to school, and I only applied there. So that's how I got to northern Minnesota from New Jersey. And then after graduating in 1994, I taught high school in northern Minnesota for 3 years, and that's where I met my wife, Sarah. She's from Minnesota, and so we were married, and then to the University of Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music for my master's work in choral conducting. Taught there for a few years afterwards, not at the university rather, but in high school, in the middle school and high school in the area. And then I was offered my first gig in higher ed in 2004 at Southwest Minnesota State University, which I didn't think I would get because I'd only completed a master's and some coursework towards my doctorate. But anyway, I got the job. We moved the family back to Marshall, Minnesota, which coincidentally is my wife's hometown, to that job. And I began my doctoral work at BU, Boston University, in music ed. I taught there till 2010, defended my dissertation in 2012, and have been at Augustana since 2010. And so I can't believe it's been 14 years. I don't think about that. It goes so quickly. But yeah, that's how I find myself here on this. It's a very, very rainy day in Sioux Falls. It feels like it's been raining all the time. That's not germane to what we're talking about, but I'm soaking wet and I'm tired of it. So there we go.
That is not something I can relate to out here in Phoenix, Arizona.
Oh my.
I don't think it's rained in 6 months.
Oh my word. Oh my, I'm coming down.
Yeah. For sure. So you've been in Sioux Falls for about 14 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you feel like you or your position has changed or evolved over that time?
Sure. Great question. It's changed a lot, both with regard to what Augustana is in the world and the terrain of higher ed in general. When I started, Augustana was Augustana College. It's now Augustana University. And that's a change that a number of schools have made in the last 5 years or so. But Augustana is taking a very forward leaning sort of posture in terms of where we want to be in the terrain of higher ed. There are a great many challenges facing higher education. I'm sure you're aware right now, and we have tremendous leadership. I've been teaching for, well, this fall will be 30 years, public school and in higher ed, and I've had a fair few administrators, and I've learned, that everybody they all say that education is their first and foremost priority, and the students are priority number one. I'm not convinced that that's always true. However, with our leadership at Augie, there are a tremendous amount of initiatives and innovations that we are making, and steps that we are taking to, particularly with regard to the musical education of our students. We're now, as of 3 years ago, have formed a School of Music, which seems a rather bold step in the 21st century, but that is kind of the point. Our goal there is, and I think this is really something that is needed, both for the students and in the world of higher education. But our goals are to, not educate students for our past, but for their future. It really is about the 21st century, and really we're already talking about the 22nd century. And with everything that's gone on, and with the developments, for example, in AI in the last 8 months or so, and how quickly that's accelerated, I think that point is, I think more and more people are waking up to that. And so that we're working really hard to make, for example, the technological capabilities of the building I'm sitting in right now. This entire building is a recording studio. All of the spaces are linked to two separate recording studios, one of which will soon be a Dolby Atmos studio.
Wow.
Our students are trained on Pro Tools, on Sibelius, on Media Composer. They're taught, when I was going to school, we were still using the Harmony textbook by Walter Piston. I have it on my shelves just over here, and I'm very fond of it. It's not the way to go now. And we're thinking very differently about how we're training our music educators, our music majors, in terms of music theory, oral skills, and so on. There's a lot more contemporary music. There's the training that's going along with it. Our students all have to still complete a piano proficiency test, but we're adding more commercial elements into that, trying to make things, when I was in school, you were either going to teach or you're going to perform. And if you were going to perform, it was going to be MT, or it was going to be, classical. Things were a bit more cut and dried, and it just isn't really that way anymore. And it hasn't been for some time. So, musicians, as, evidenced by the work that you're doing with your podcast, musicians are cobbling together a life in music, and it looks very different. I could not have imagined sitting here and talking to you, Ted, via a Ethernet cable in 1994. It just would never have entered my mind. And now here we are, and it's I guess I'm preaching a little bit, but I really believe this stuff. And maybe as recently as 5 years ago, if someone had said to me, perhaps species counterpoint is something best left to students who are going to pursue graduate school, and maybe we don't need to address that in our music theory curriculum, I would have dusted off my shoulders and pounded my fist on the heavy mahogany table, and and said, pulled the pipe from my mouth and said, "Nay, sir." It's
How
just,
dare you insult Strunken White? Like,
yes, exactly. Gratis ad parnassum. What are you talking about? So, and now these are conversations they're tricky, but they're important. And so, to answer your question and sort of land the plane here, it's changed a lot. I'm really excited about it. There was, there was a bit of a malaise that I went through professionally, thinking, what are we doing? Where are we going? And now, I'm no spring chicken. I'm 52, but I'm not an old codger yet. And this dog can learn new tricks, and I'm excited about the things that we're doing, and I'm excited to learn from my students about things, about approaches to music I never would have imagined, and it's made me a better musician and a better teacher. And so I'm very honored to be able to occupy this office and work with the students and work with my colleagues and explore these new beachheads, if you will, and to see these landscapes that are opening up. I'm a my job requires me to be extroverted, as you can imagine.
Of course,
But
yeah.
I'm kind of a quiet guy. I really would rather, I'm more introverted. And I, it even a year ago, I would have probably not have accepted your gracious invitation to do something like this. But it's important to engage with. We musicians have to support one another, right?
Mhm.
And we have to engage with one another. And if that means that we're going to have this conversation like this, and I mean, I listen to a lot of podcasts and I've learned a lot from that technology. And so why would I be hesitant to participate? If there's one thing I've learned over the year, my dad used to say, good things take time, but great things happen all at once. Sometimes you got to just jump in like it's a cold pool. I've learned, don't climb down the ladder, just jump in. So
Yeah.
apologies for the long-winded answer, but I can be a little bit verbose about this stuff.
No, I think that's fantastic. I think that's a great place to wrap this up. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's right. Well played.
no, really, Russ, that was beautiful. I
Thank
don't
you.
know if you had that prepared, but
No,
it seems like that, like you've been thinking about these things for quite some time,
yeah,
and it feels like the underlying word that goes behind everything that you just mentioned was the necessity for change,
yeah,
especially compared to, you mentioned 5 years ago or so,
yeah,
pounding on that mahogany
yeah.
desk.
Right, right.
What do you think inspired that change, both in you and also in the once college, now university?
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's a great question. It's the colleagues, it's difficult conversations when you naturally in any faculty, in any environment, there's turnover of people and new people come on board. I in my mind, I'm still 25, you know.
Mhm.
But as I said, I've been teaching for almost 30 years. And so that means that when it comes to these meetings and so forth that I'm sitting in, I now tend to be I'm the one in the School of Music who really, I think, has been here the longest now. That's
Mm.
incredible to me. I don't think of myself, I still think of myself as this goofy young tenor. And and now I've had the great privilege to be surrounded by really brilliant people,
Mm.
both, and really from the C-suite here at Augie, down to our dean here in the School of Music. These are brilliant people who have a vast array of experiences that are just as deep as mine, but very different. And they bring to the table it was really the pandemic where a colleague of mine who is now the dean, we were thinking, what are we going to do with our big Christmas program? We can't
Mm.
perform this live. Everybody was, wondering the same thing. And so I learned what a click track was. I didn't know what that was before then. I didn't know how. I'd never really sat in a video recording session of that magnitude, and I've never talked about recording things in different rooms simultaneously and using technology to solve these problems. And so it really is. It's the people, it's the technology, and just being willing to I'm not really sure about this, but I'm gonna say yes. I'm just, I'm a man of faith, and I've worked really hard to get this job. And I mean, you could say, I say this sometimes where I feel like, I've been in my boat pulling on the oars for a long time. And you know how this business is. You got to work really hard and you're pulling on those oars. But I look back over my shoulder as a man of faith and I realize I'm not the one that carved the channel. I did not get here on my own, and um, so I just choose to trust, and that instinct has always served me well when I recognize that the gifts in other people that other people have, and then you're just willing to sort of fall in line and follow. It just has really, that willingness to, as I said before, just jump into that pool. It doesn't always work, but There's a swing and a miss. I've fouled out a few times, but more often than not, if you can go into it for me with that mindset of, look, I'm going to trust that this person knows what they're doing, and I'm going to do everything I can to make this successful, because ultimately, as a teacher, right, it's about the students.
Sure.
It's about the students and it's about the music. So if I can keep that sort of, frame around the window here, that where we're heading, as if that's the edges of the windshield, then I've learned that serves me pretty well.
So it really sounds like you're doing everything possible to more or less future-proof your students for whatever might come, whatever next huge revolutionary technology might come down the pipe,
Yeah,
to make sure that they can still be healthy, productive, musical members of whatever society they choose to partake in.
right, right. I'm trying to play my role in that.
Yeah.
I have colleagues that they know much more about the technological side of producing a recording. I could never run Pro Tools or anything like that, but I know how to tune a chord, and I know how to help singers uh, understand how vowels are supposed to blend, and I know how to interpret Palestrina versus Benjamin Britten, and so I'm just trying to be, I have said many times that I consider myself a utility player.
Mm.
Put me in, coach. There's a few things that I can do well. I did play baseball growing up, and I pitched, and I wasn't very good, but I was enthusiastic. I was a and I was a pretty good first baseman, and I was a terrible third baseman. I was an even worse shortstop. If you and I were sitting in the same room, Ted, you would understand why. I've never been described as spry, but
Okay.
but if you know your role and you know what you're good at, and you trust, that the shortstop knows what he's doing, and the third baseman knows what she's doing, then you believe in your teammates. It's amazing what you can get done.
Yeah. So I know that this image exists in classical music culture of this sort of uh, totalitarian conductor, right? And
Mhm.
it may have started with Toscanini, or it may have gone even further back than that. Who knows? I'm not a
Yeah,
historian.
right.
But how do you feel like that role, that image, has shifted, or should it shift? Does it need to shift more?
Yeah, great question. And I love the example of Toscanini, because I use him. I think you're right, and I use him as an example sometimes too. Did you know that in the last few years of his career, he carried a gun? And it
I did
wasn't
not
to
know that.
protect him from members of society. It was protect him. He was getting threats from members of his orchestra. I think
Oh, I
that's
had no idea. I hadn't heard
that's
that.
incredible. It's incredible. And that story I've heard a few times from a few different people. I think I read it somewhere. I don't think I think it's correct. I'm hoping it is. And if it's not, and somebody hears this and calls foul, I apologize and stand corrected. But I think that's amazing.
Yeah, we're
Um,
not citing our sources here,
no,
but
we're not. We're not.
but it's a great
Thank
story.
you. Thank you, Sarah. Um, so that has been a real area of growth for me too. I went to Concordia College in the early '90s, and I sang under Renee Clausen, who is he's one of the most brilliant choral conductors and composers out there, and a very gentle person.
Mhm.
Very kind. But times were different, and we there was no talking in rehearsal. You would never consider being late, and I don't know, in my 3 years in the Concordia Choir, that I ever missed one because I was sick. It just didn't happen. It isn't 1991 anymore. It's not, and there are a great many pressures on our students. I'm not so sure they have more than we had, but it's certainly different, right? And the role of the conductor, I think, has changed, and I think for the better. I'll give you an example. Um, I, yeah, we'll talk about like policies with regard to a collegiate choral ensemble. You can imagine how long syllabi are anymore. Even before COVID, but now post-COVID, syllabi. When I was going to school, I keep saying that, and I apologize because it makes me sound like the get off my lawn guy,
Right.
like some old codger. But the syllabi were one page, maybe double-sided, but more often than not one page. And now they're voluminous, and they're
Hmm.
not even paper. It's all electronic.
What's the
With
difference? What's in there now that wasn't 20 years ago?
Well, you have to, for example, all of our outcomes we align them with NASM, our accrediting body. So all of that is linked and all of that is spelled out. The grading policy is spelled out in great detail. The attendance policy, the all of the required syllabus language from the university with regard to student success, resources for mental health.
Hmm.
We still have our post-COVID policies in there as well. Some of this can be hyperlinked, some of it cannot, and it has to actually be there. The point is, it's just there's a lot in a syllabus, and there's a lot of policies, and the attendance policy that I was used to, I think I talked about a moment ago. You would be there, and it was understood you would be there, and you would be early, and that was that, and it worked. It worked, but it's different now. And we recently underwent a process of amending the attendance policy because I recognized, and I talked to this with the students openly near the end of our own rehearsal. I said, honestly, I don't think the attendance policy we have is working. And I think that's partially because it's been to now prescriptive. I have come up with the policy with my colleagues, and we have put it into the syllabus, and we have given it to you. Students have never been involved in that process of creating an attendance policy together. So I said, I really think that I really think we ought to do that. I think that's the best practices. We talk a lot about that here at Augie, best practices. I think that's really the best way forward. And I was just honest with them. As I get older, I've somehow become more sentimental, but also more secure in being vulnerable. I don't know if that really makes sense, but I just told them, look, I've never undertaken a discussion like this. This is not how I was trained, but I want you to know that we're going to do this, and I will do everything I can to be a part of and facilitate this discussion in good faith, so that this is something we really are doing together. And we did that. We did that in April. And it was a great conversation. And they had a million questions that I'd never thought of.
Like what?
And isn't that always the way it is? Where you open things up, you just learn things and hear things you would never, as a college professor, we're so fancy, and we're supposed to, people call me doctor, and we're supposed to know everything. And yet, if you just use the cartilaginous flaps on the side of my head as opposed to the yapping maw that is always running, and listen instead of speak, wonderful conversation happens. And then I told them I would take that, and I'll be sending it to them this summer again, so that we can have an electronic discussion about it and finalize it. It's been wonderful.
What were
It's
some
been
of those
wonderful.
questions those unexpected questions that would have never crossed your mind that came up?
Great question. Great question. They wanted to know, with regard to excused absences. Excused absences until now have dealt with exclusively physical ailments. And they asked, could mental health be rolled into that? I'd never even considered that, honestly.
Hmm.
I thought, and I thought, well, that's a really great, an astute question to ask. Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that. Another would be, in talking about planning for the year. You know how it is with a choir. I have everything planned for next year, not just with performance dates and venues, but I've got repertoire ready to go, and I'm already marking scores. And the adjustments have to be made because you have to adjust to the choir that's in front of you, not the choir that's in your mind.
Right, but to a certain degree, there's certain things that kind of have to be planned out ahead of time, or else the rehearsal process will take 2 years for a 3-month choir.
Yes, exactly. And it is the case where families want to take trips, and they, and that's happened a lot in the last, even more frequently in the last 5 years, where we have for example, next March, we have a recording session planned, a 3-day recording project planned.
Mhm.
And what if, at the end of August, some parents, or, over Christmas, even, some parents surprise their kids, as parents do for their children. Hey, we're going on a cruise. We bought a cruise this weekend. That has happened. What do we do about that? What do we do about that? You just fail a student because they can't come to a performance or something? I'm not going to lie. The 1991 Russ looks at that and cringes,
Mm.
right? But 2024, 52 years old, take a deep breath. The wheels are not going to fall off, and it's not 1991 anymore. Everything's going to be okay. We ought to be able to talk about that stuff and have a way to deal with it that supports the student and the aims of the ensemble and honors the legacy of the choir. You can't always make everybody happy, and you can't accommodate every situation, but
Sure.
certainly some thought about that sort of stuff. And again, that was brought up in the discussion with the choir, and I just loved having that conversation. I thought, oh yeah, yeah, of course we have to talk about that. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Best way to deal with it is just talk about it. So
I imagine that like the example that you just raised, it's got the wheels turning in my head as well, because it's not a conversation that I've ever had. I'm not
right.
a doctoral conductor of a university choir,
Mhm.
right? But because when the goal of the institution is learning, how much extra is learned from following through with the performance versus the
Right.
previous semester of rehearsal. Uh,
Sure.
I think there's absolutely lessons that are learned in
Oh,
performance that are
yes.
not learned in rehearsal,
Right.
for sure.
Right.
So by
Yep.
not going to the concert, you miss out on that.
Sure.
And how
Sure.
much of that should impact the grade, the end all be all
Right.
grade that the student
Right.
gets? Gosh, that's
Yeah.
such an interesting question.
Yeah. And that kind of thing is out of a student's control, because
Yeah.
a parent who isn't a musician, right? And they just want to do something nice for their family,
Yeah.
of course. I mean, I've got kids myself. I want to, I'm a dad. I want to be the dad who, hey, we're going to, guess what we did, guys? Mom and we're doing this. Um, and, so there's a lot of other stuff that goes into play with that, with being organized. And then, I have the schedule out now. I mean, they got it a month ago for next year. So hopefully we'll find out about conflicts, but, it is, the larger point for me is that, um, the uh the prescriptive thing doesn't really work anymore.
Hmm.
And it's okay to talk about difficult things. It's okay to talk about things that can get a little bit sticky, and where, particularly with regard to where priorities lay, because not everybody has the same priority. And students are very comfortable talking about that now. It's fine. Um, and this, maybe what we're doing isn't for everybody. And as a music educator, right? I want to cast the widest nets. I want the biggest tent, kind of a thing.
Sure.
That's hard for me to think about, but it's okay. It's okay, because we're talking about it and being vulnerable with one another. These are, I like to think that I'm a nice guy, but this kind of stuff never would have occurred to me 10 years ago. And I'm
Yeah.
just so thankful that it does now, and that I have the support of colleagues and administrators to be able to be the leader of this program, and to say, hey folks, hey guys, this is where I think we need to go. This is how I think we need to get it done. What do you think? I'm not really sure about this aspect of it. How can we, what do we do? How do we figure this out together? It's great to work in an environment like that, and it speaks volumes to the kind of students that we have here too.
I'm
So,
glad you brought up the quality of student there, because I've had conversations with other people in university uh,
mhm.
who have done their best to be very careful with language, but
Mhm.
have made it clear that their perspective is that students have become less responsible,
Mm.
especially since COVID, and have
Huh.
become more fragile, I
Yeah,
suppose,
yeah.
would be the word that they use.
Mhm.
How would you respond to something like that? Has that been your experience?
That's a great question, and it is something that gets talked about around the proverbial water cooler a lot, you know?
Yeah.
Um, Students are different now. Um, uh, there, there is, when I think of the ways in which some of my teachers talk to me, that would never work now. Um,
Could you be more specific?
sure, sure. I I don't know. There are a number of stories.
Well,
Um,
let's try not to throw anyone under the bus, of course, but
no, 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 no. But I did have I did have uh, a teacher for a counterpoint teacher who was brilliant, but who made it pretty clear that he thought I did not deserve to have a seat in that classroom
hmm,
from day one, and that um, when I was bringing my work to him, that it was subpar, and he used the words. I'm paraphrasing because it was a while ago,
sure.
but you're not. This is not really for you. Have you thought about something else? Because if
Hmm,
you can't do this, you can't really be a great musician. And if you can't be a great musician, what's the point? What's your plan? Have you thought of a plan B? For that's pretty hard to hear,
yeah.
right? Was it a kick in the pants for me to work hard? Yeah, I'm a competitive guy, and I didn't love the guy, but I also it did not, it didn't scare me is the wrong way, but it did make me work harder. So to go back to your previous question, I do notice a difference in students. I'm not really sure, they're kids though. And it's, I didn't have a smartphone. I didn't have social media. I didn't have, people dragging me on group chats, which happens. I didn't have malicious uh, pictures and things, or the threat of that, the possibility of that going on. I didn't have all the just. I mean, listen, I have my iPhone sitting next to me, and to 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 harshly criticize somebody for being on their phone too much would be so hypocritical of me,
Hmm.
because I check the thing all the time. I get it. So I think students have. I said earlier, I'm not so sure they have more pressures on them, but I think they have different kinds of pressures on them than I did, and I do think it has had an impact. I also think, I also think that, and this is, I've got two kids. They're both, my son just graduated college, and our daughter's a sophomore in college, and um, I do think that the response of parents to things has changed the way students are. I think that's changed a little bit too. Nevertheless, and this is something I have to remind myself, because I can be a grumpy old man, but I have to remind myself they're just students, they're just learning. And I also think, you know, I feel very fortunate to teach at Augustana University in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. It's a pretty great place to live. Our students are smart, they're intellectually curious, they're pretty well rounded. They tend to have both feet on the ground,
Hmm.
and that's true of my colleagues as well. So I think, there are difficulties with regard to this topic all of the time, but for the most part, they're outliers. And I think I think we found something, or at least I have something of a sweet spot here. And I'm also, I have had to adjust my approach and the way I think about things, but there's nothing wrong with that. You know, it, I, it, it is real tempting to think about this to sort of bring it back around to our friend Arturo Toscanini. It's real tempting to think that, with all the wonderful opportunities to study with brilliant people that I have had and incredible experiences, to stand up there and my way or the highway, I, I, I was given some advice in education class in college, and it burned me. And I think about it. I think about it quite frequently, Ted. An education professor, a very well-meaning education professor who hadn't taught in public school in a long time, was talking about communicating with students, and he was advocating for being very plain spoken. He said, listen, the worst thing you could do if your class is talking is the shushing and the please be quiet. And he says, you're just filling the world with noise. If you want them to shut up, tell them to shut up. And I thought, oh, and I wrote that down. I wrote it down in my notebook. I'm that guy. I'm the notebook guy. And my first year of teaching, I remember the choir, I remember the music we were working on, and I remember the moment, which for me is unusual. This is the impact it made, and they were yakking it up, and I yelled, "Shut up!" And I remember, and that did not go over well. And I remember the student who is still a friend to this day, and I remember that she shared with me after that this is a very sharp, mature kid, and she said, I don't like being told to shut up. I think it's rude. And I don't think you'd like it either. And that has stuck with me. So I guess the point, I'm all over the place. I apologize.
No, this is great.
For me, that caroms around my noggin all the time that you're just a guy doing a job. Yeah, you've worked really hard to do it well, and maybe sometimes you do it well, but there's always room for growth, Russell. You can always learn and just take it, I can be a hothead and I want to get work done and make the best of standards and all that, but, take a breath, count to 3 and, like I said earlier, I'm very prone to yapping, but I find things are a lot better if I use, as I said, the cartilaginous flaps on the side of my head, and I can be a little stubborn, so it's taken me a while to figure that out.
So you mentioned a couple of qualities about the student body and the faculty that exists at Augustana. So the words that stuck with me was your student body is well-rounded and 2 feet on the ground, and in general you said some very positive things. Is that something that you've actively cultivated in the students once they get there? Is that something that you have in your mind when you're looking at applications or hearing auditions, or is that something you've just happened to luck yourself into?
That's a great question. Yeah, when we talk with a lot of prospective students, we hear a lot of auditions, and yes, we do look at stuff. We do pay attention to when we're talking to students, prospective students, we pay attention to their answers when we're talking about things that have nothing to do with what they might or might not do at Augustana or their major or whatever. Those informal conversations are important. We pay attention when, I have had the chance to, I'm very fortunate to be asked to be a section leader for the South Dakota Honor Choir a number of times, conducted the South Dakota All-State Choir, do a lot of clinics, do a lot of contests. And when students are interacting, we pay attention, we listen when there's a break in rehearsal. And, students can help or hurt their case in that way. Is it something I've cultivated? I don't know. I think, it's maybe regional, although, I'm just in South Dakota, and I'm sure that my friends at other institutions think this way of their students too, and it's just, I think it's something that's a little bit more endemic to maybe, and I'm probably wrong, but maybe it's a Midwestern thing or something. I don't know. And maybe it's the school, maybe it's combinatory. It's all of those things. I also think honestly, because that sounds so, to me, that's a little bit outrageous to say those things, but I also think it has more to do with, maybe it has more to do with my perspective and the way I'm choosing to look at things. And that I like to think that I'm not the same person I was when I came out of college. I've always been a nice guy, but in terms of dealing with students, I think that um I've learned to listen more and to find ways to, for me, this has always kind of been a thing. Uh, I learned really quick in my career that the teacher's lounge can be a bad place for me.
Hmm.
I'll give you an example. If a, I've taught a lot of students now over the years, and I have learned that it's normal for people to vent. It's normal, and teaching is hard. It's very, very difficult. And I have heard teachers talk about students and use, very, very harsh language. Look, no judgment. I'm from New Jersey. Okay. There's not a word you could say, Ted, that would offend me. It's impossible. However, when it comes to students, I've learned this about myself that, for example, if I have student A who's being difficult in class chronically, this is a regular thing. I've had this happen. I would want to say, that kid is what a SOB, excuse me, that kid is being, but I've learned I can't say that stuff out loud. I can't, for me, I use the word turkey. I know this sounds so hokey, but if a student is being difficult, I will say out loud, boy, so-and-so is really being a turkey today. Because if I use stronger language than that, it's like I turn a corner on a student. And I have learned that once I turn a corner on a student, I can't come back around, if that makes sense.
Totally.
And so I've worked and learned, I guess, or taught myself over these years that I don't want to go around a corner on a student. And so empathy plays into that, and listening plays into that. And my mother always said, both my parents did, never judge a person before you walk a mile in their shoes. And that's not, I don't really like it when people talk to me in bumper stickers. I'm not really a fan of that sort of thing, but
It is kind of its own language, isn't it?
it is, right.
Yeah.
Right. If it's used too much, it's too much is too much. But that's true, and for me, it's more about being careful, knowing where my guardrails are. I can't go down this road and think about the student this way, because I'll never come back around that corner. And I guess I'm glad I figured that out, but it certainly has helped in my interactions with students. I will say that's one of the harder parts of the job sometimes, but it is also really fertile soil. It's the place where I've grown. I feel like I've learned and grown the most. So I feel like I was all over there. Sorry about that.
No, I think it absolutely answered the question. So for any prospective students who might be listening right now, what are, I suppose, let's start off with the basic logistical stuff. Is Augie strictly undergrad? Is it a mix of undergrad, grad school? Like, what are some of the degrees that are offered?
Sure. With regard to music, we offer undergrad degrees. We do offer masters and doctorates, but not in music. We have a doctor of physical therapy, and some other things are being offered. We are working on, so the degrees that we offer are music education. We offer a music minor, obviously. We also offer a multimedia entrepreneurship major, which is specific to it. It is interdisciplinary. So it deals with music. The student will have theory and oral skills, but they will also have some business classes, some marketing training. And these are students who are getting certified in all three of Avid's software platforms: Sibelius, Pro Tools, and Media Composer. They can go on and become certified to teach those software platforms by my colleague Frank Cook and our dean Pete Folliard. we have students, these multimedia entrepreneurship students are already, even before they graduate, getting production credits. So they're running, we do a lot of recording with the ensembles here. They're running all these sessions, setting up the schedules, learning even little things. Every member of the choir, they already know how to roll up a mic cable. There's a special way to do that. And that to me is a 21st century music education, where even just a non-major in a choir knows how to roll up a mic cable, they learn about mic placement. We have students, we've had
for anyone listening who might be giggling at that, rolling up a mic cable, an XLR cable, is a very specific skill.
It's
if you
a
do it
very
wrong, you're going to
specific,
ruin it. So.
Exactly. And you're going to infuriate your audio techs, if you just grab it and roll it up like it's a garden hose. I mean, I didn't know that 3 years ago. But then we will in a year's time be offering performance degrees. So a BM and a BME, so Bachelor of Music Education as well. So that's a sort of an overview of what we do here. But like I said, a life in music is cobbled together. Most of our students in the ensembles are non-majors. That's a very Lutheran liberal arts thing, St. Olaf, Luther, Augie, Concordia, and so on. And that's a marvelous thing unto itself. But they all have the opportunity to have a wide array of experiences. We have students who have interned with Jason Derulo and run auto tuning for Harry Styles, and it's getting more, and the experience is getting richer and richer. And as well as I that sort of thing cross-pollinates. That's not endemic to just one program. That sort of thing, that's the beautiful thing about music, it's that Bruckner was infatuated with the opening of Beethoven's Symphony 9, and he incorporated that in every one of his symphonies. That's how musicians operate. And if musicians didn't care about what one another was doing, we wouldn't have had the feud between Drake and Kendrick, right? So I throw that in there not because I know anything about it, but
you know that it happened.
I know that it exists. There you go.
And it was a big deal for the people who cared. It was a huge
big deal. I understand.
And it's also a brilliant example of musicians playing off each other.
They do. I understand that Kendrick at a concert the other night played his one of his diss tracks for Drake 6 times. Wow. 6 times during the concert. I don't know the music. I don't really know what that means, but to me that sounds like throwing down the gauntlet. That seems pretty significant, Yeah. This is the old tenor.
And then when you're hearing auditions or doing interviews, what are some of the things that you really look for that could set a student apart?
Yeah. Well, obviously, you singing, right? There is no substitute for beautiful singing. But that can also be taught. Intellectual curiosity is really important. The openness to new ideas and the ability to be sort of flexible, I think being a good sport is really important. I tell my students all the time that you need to be competent and you need to be able to do your stuff. You need to be reliable, which is 15 minutes early to every gig. And you need to be easy to work with, right? So I kind of look for those things when I'm talking with prospective students. Like, do they seem competent? They seem, they're nervous. They're talking to you. They don't know you. You don't know them. Everybody's a little bit on edge. How do they handle that? Have they been involved in a bunch of stuff? Do they seem, are they, not every conversation flows because everybody's a little bit different, but are they, when you hit on something that's interesting to them, are they able to spark? Do you get something from them? Are they adding to the conversation? What sort of level of engagement do they, or role rather, do they want music to play in their college education? Are they able to speak to that? So students that are able to that are comfortable talking about who they are, who they think they might be, and what they're looking for in a program. So, and again, every person is different, and I've learned to listen to because everybody expresses themselves in a different way. You got to learn you got to be able to listen in different ways too.
Mhm.
But like, that intellectual curiosity is big. And those three things I was talking about, am I getting little echoes of those? Does this student seem to have, the seeds of those three qualities? I think that's really important.
Absolutely. That it's such an important thing, and many people have said similar things because those are incredibly valuable skills. How would someone go about cultivating that
Yeah.
even in high school?
Yeah, yeah, great question. I think, and it's hard for students, but I think being involved you know, in a number of things, not sort of siloing. And that's hard for
Mm,
students nowadays. Like, our daughter played club volleyball, right? It was great. It was great, but it meant she didn't play basketball,
sure,
and she didn't run track.
because there's
And
only so many hours.
there are, and that's just life now for students. But being involved not just in musical things, right, but having some experience maybe with sports, having held a part-time job, been involved in a theater production, be involved in the community somehow, maybe you sing in
Mm.
a church choir, or you're teching for a summer theater events in the park for kids or something. You know what I mean? I've seen these. I'm just kind of listing off things I've seen and noticed from students that are really interesting and I think helpful. I think, um uh that it's it might seem like it'd be really attractive for a student to just go down that rabbit hole of music, 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 music. And that, for some, that's the path, right? I have had uh, like three students in my 14 years here at Augustana that they're going to be singers. That's what they're doing,
Mm.
and they want to do that. That's not really how it works for everybody else, but the ability uh, to be open to lots of different experiences and being able to talk about that, I think all those things are really, I think, is good for kids.
Yeah, the dangers of early specialization are
Sure.
wide for sure. We talk about
Yep.
it in sports all the time. So I really spend a
Yep.
lot of my time where music and sports cross over, like
Yeah.
in the middle of that Venn diagram. And I think
Yeah.
the middle of that Venn diagram is just growing and every single day. Um,
Agreed.
but for many years, 31 out of the 32 starting quarterbacks in the NFL were multi-sport athletes in high school.
I did not know that. That does not surprise me.
Yeah, for many
Wow.
years.
Wow.
And
Okay.
I mean, that's the most impressive stat, but many
Yeah.
similar stats exist for all of the skilled players on the football field.
Yeah.
Uh,
My wife is an athlete, and she has said for years that if you look at these players in the MLB or the NBA or NFL, she said, a lot of these guys could have played professional football if they're in the MLB, or
yeah,
they could have, if they're in the NBA, they were probably recruited to play baseball too. That to me, that blows my mind to
it's
think
it's pretty
to
amazing.
remember that Bo Jackson played professional football and professional baseball at the same time blows my mind. But I did not know that stat. Thank you for sharing that with me. I'm going to write that
My
down when
pleasure.
we're done here, because that's
My
that's a
pleasure. Yeah.
that's a little nugget.
Yeah, the having an incredibly deep and strong foundation is never a weakness
Right.
as far as I can tell.
Agreed. Agreed.
So that's really where I spend my time is in making
Yep.
singers more athletic so they can do anything and everything better. Uh,
Love it. I
so
see the weights behind you. I see all that
oh
all that
yeah.
equipment behind you.
And
There you go.
there's a piano over here
And
too.
look at
So,
that. It's a
uh,
21st century classroom right there.
yeah,
Love it.
exactly. Exactly. So it really sounds like you're doing some incredible work over there at Augie. You're
Thank you.
really
Thank you.
pushing the foundation or pushing the boundaries of what a music degree means or could mean. I mean, when I was going through undergrad and grad school, there was like there was the performance side, there was the education side, and then there was the recording side. And if
Mhm.
you were in the
Yep.
education or performance side, you really didn't talk to the recording majors, and vice
Right.
versa, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it seems like the work that you're doing over the last however many years, I think
Mhm.
we've thrown around the number of 5 years or so,
Yep.
has really just done yeoman's work in breaking down that barrier and
Yeah.
building incredible bridges and innovating and creating the kind of students that the world and that music really needs today.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. It does. I agree. I agree that Billie Eilish wrote her first album on a laptop in her bedroom, right?
Yeah.
I mean that
Yeah.
that's crazy, right? I mean it's not crazy, but it's just for a 52-year-old guy, when you think about how, I'm a Van Halen guy, so going back a long way. So you think
Sure.
about how that music used to be written and what's possible now with this MacBook that I'm talking to you on. I mean, it everything has become so there are so many opportunities to be creative,
It feels
and
like
so many ways to nurture that, you
it feels
know?
like it's become much more communitized. Like
Mm,
rather than music being only written by people who could afford to pay composers, who
right,
could patron certain
right.
composers, like
Yeah,
going to Van Halen, writing it in your
yeah,
garage, to
yep,
now, folks like Billie Eilish, and there are thousands of them. TikTok has
right,
showed us that thousands is probably undercutting
yep,
it,
yep,
right? People who can, download some software for cheap or free
yeah,
and start producing studio level work. It's
yeah.
phenomenal. It's
We just had a gentleman on campus about a month and a half ago who has done all kinds of studio work he did all the music for Desperate Housewives,
hmm.
um, all the sound design for um one, two or three of those NCIS shows.
Oh,
He
sure.
does he does that kind of commercial work. And he was here for 3 days. He's a friend of my colleague Frank Cook,
Hmm.
who's just a genius. And um, he was talking with our students about how this works. Now, this guy has a six-figure income, passive income, just from the work he's done in the last 15 years, and he'll have it because it's all in syndication.
Sure.
So when an episode of whatever show airs, he gets a check, and that's six figures every year, and he never has to do anything more. And he brought up their website, and he did this whole workshop where he took them through scoring a show, and he kept telling them. And for me, I'm hearing things, and I'm like, huh. He's saying things like, "It doesn't have to be good; it just has to be effective." And I thought, oh, wait a minute. But then I remember that we watched Desperate Housewives when it came out in our house. I, One of my favorite shows is Breaking Bad.
Hmm.
Um, and all of those shows have a musical component, and two very different kind of, and where would it be? Who am I, to use the big J word, to judge that sort of thing? You're like, holy, we're just all people trying to make a living, and he's just trying to do his part for this thing. It's not about the music. It's not really about the individual characters. It's about all of it at the same time. I just thought that was remarkable. We had a lot of conversations with students about that, and to see somebody that's out to get to know somebody who's out there doing that kind of work. I've never met anybody like that, and it was wild to watch him work.
It's a
And
career that didn't seem to exist until 5 years ago.
100%, Ted, 100%.
So how in the world could you get a degree in it?
Right.
Uh,
Yeah. And he was talking about that too. His students were talking about, like, and he told a couple of them, he's like, "Hey, why are you here? Quit school. You want to go out and write music for TV. Start writing music for TV. Start doing it now."
hmm.
And it's hard to argue with that, Uh, you just do it. That's what a lot of our colleagues, our heroes, did that very thing. Pavarotti, you ask him to talk about the Passaggio, he really couldn't. But of course, he's an outlier. That guy was, an amazing freak in a
Sure, sure.
wonderful way, right?
Yeah.
But you wouldn't put him in a voice studio; he wouldn't know what to do. but he's out there doing it, you know? So
Yeah.
for me, it's a reminder to be humble. You know, Russell, you have all of this conservatory training. You've done blah, blah. It doesn't mean a hill of beans. It's good for you, Russell. That's fine. Be humble. Remember that every single one of us is a person in music. We're just trying to feed our families. We're just trying to make people happy. We're just trying to do something, contribute something good to other people on this planet. And that's noble. That's worthy, you know?
Yeah.
And that gets sometimes, man, when I'm tired and it's back to back to back class, concert, rehearsal, that gets me through, you know?
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm not making six figures. I'm doing something wrong, but we're all just trying to do this thing, and it's a wonderful thing, and it's worthy.
I think that is a great place to wrap up. Uh, so Russ, thank you so much for your time and your insight, and all of the incredible work that I'm getting a vibe like you've only just scratched the surface
Yeah,
over what's possible with the
yeah.
incredible facility that you have. And I hope that anyone who's listening to this, who may have either stumbled on it or is looking at Augie as a potential next step after they finish high school or wherever they are, has really gotten the same kind of vibe, that it is an incredibly welcoming, innovative, not lax. Like you're not giving away degrees for free over there,
Hmm.
but
Right.
absolutely the kind of place that is producing the types of musicians that are getting hired and that are able to put together the kind of life they want to in music.
Oh, well, that's very kind of you to say, Ted. Thank you very much. And thank you for the invitation to be on this podcast. And thank you there's a lot of work that goes into putting this together. I've learned that watching my colleagues. We now have a number of podcasts here at Augie, and watching that, I know that that's no small feat. And I'm very appreciative of you for all of the work you're doing on behalf of music and music education. Really, this is what you're doing, and continuing to ring that bell that this is something that's worth talking about, and that I'm very grateful for you and others like you that are pulling the sled up the hill. You know, and that, you know, that work needs to be done, and I'm just very, very grateful to be asked and to have a chance to talk about this stuff, and for your wonderful questions and the fact that this program exists. I just think it's remarkable. Congratulations.
Oh, well, I appreciate that very much. Thank you again
Oh,
for your
you're welcome.
time, and I can't wait to talk to you soon.
I look forward to it, Ted. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed listening to that episode of the High Note Podcast just as much as we enjoyed recording it. If you'd like to learn more about our guest, you can check the description down below to follow them and all the places where you might be able to follow them. If you want to take the next possible step in becoming a high note athlete, again, everything you need is in the description down below. Before you leave, do make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe. It is the best way that you can help the podcast grow to reach more high performance people just like yourself. Can't wait to see you next week.